Hello, and welcome back to Veteran Instincts. This week, we've got some new toys to play with. We are joined by 186 Supremo, Alex Birt. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
And we're going to be looking at a game that he and I have played almost as soon as the points came out and recorded in a hurry to get it out to you guys. I hope you enjoy it. We're looking at here Imperials versus Rebels, using stuff from the new Squadron packs. And Alex, why don't you kick us off telling us about your list and out of the new stuff, why you went for this?
Okay, well, I wanted to see what all the fuss was about with Vader and the Defender. Plus, when you were asking what other new stuff I fancy playing, I didn't really want to play against Vader and the Defender. So playing with him seemed like the obvious solution, which is good. And then I obviously went to try and figure out what was the best thing to put with him. So like the obvious, potentially obvious thing seems to just be like Soontir and a massive beard. But I don't know that really is the kind of list I want to fly, or the necessarily best option for playing against the field in general, I suppose. So basically I looked what would fit in the remaining points of the list, ran a bunch of options by Lloyd. He told me they were all terrible, and then eventually, after a lot of ruling stuff out, we decided to settle on Fifth Brother and Seventh Sister. I was going to say the Inquisitors, but they're like the fancy Inquisitor leaders, I suppose.
The named Inquisitors that aren't the Grand Inquisitor.
Yes, I'm not actually sure what they are in canon. I'm sure there's a name for them. The siblings, there we go, the Dark Siblings. I don't know if that's true.
I think it is, but we'll go with it.
And so I think people will be familiar with Fifth Brother and Seventh Sister, but what does Vader do in a Defender?
Vader in a Defender rolls 3 hits when he's attacking. No, well, that might as well be what he does, but the actual ability is you cannot spend force charges when defending. When you perform an attack, you may spend 1 force charge to change 1 blank result to a hit result.
Nice, and he retains the Defender's stat line of 3 agility, 3 hull, 4 shields, 3 attack dice, and gets his 3 force carried over from the Tyrant's prototype. And as with all Defenders, we're not using the title in this game, he is going to get to take a free evade action after he performs a speed 3, 4, or 5 maneuver. From my side, I've taken the A-Wings. I think probably out of all the faction packs, they seem like the funnest addition to the game. I kind of ummed and ahed about whether to go for a kind of rebel salad, kind of 4-ship rebel list, looked at the B-Wings. But I think to make the most out of the A-Wings, they need to pack a bit of a punch. And so I kind of hit on this list of just taking as many pockets as I could, basically. So I've got Harrison Dula, whose ability is that whilst a friendly ship at range 0 to 2 is attacking or defending, you may transfer 1 of your green tokens, focus or evade, to that ship. I couldn't quite afford prockets on her, so she's got some thread tracers, which hopefully at I6 will be nice to set up a load of locks for the other guys. And then backing her up are Wedge, Sabine, Derek Clivian, aka Hobby, and tried and trusted Jake Farrell, all of whom have prockets. And I'll go through their abilities kind of as they come up in the game. They're sort of fairly straightforward, most of them, and I think almost all of them trigger during this match, so we'll talk through them when we get to them. So a quick technical note for the viewers. We're obviously playing this game very shortly after the points have been released, and the TTS overlay is not yet up to date and not happy with the new pilots. So through a lot of brute force, we've been able to get it looking pretty accurate. The only thing I couldn't fix is that at 115 points, Vader is so expensive that even putting a load of upgrades on any of the other Defenders, you can't quite get them there. So the points here on Vader of 113 are wrong. He should be 2 points more expensive. As a result of that, we are both sitting at 200s. And Alex, unfortunately, won the roll-off and has elected to make me move first.
Well, you've got 2 I3 pilots, 2 I4 pilots, and an I6. Which obviously doesn't look too great for you, as Alex has got 2 I4s and an I6 now with a lot of stuff moving after you. How has that influenced how you've approached turn 0 and the sort of rock setup you've built here?
In terms of the rock placement, let's start with that. Probably not greatly. I mean, both lists have pretty maneuverable ships. The Defender actually is by far the least maneuverable thing. Alex is going to want to leverage those K-turns. So I think this quite tight net of obstacles in the center of the board isn't bad for me, as long as I don't engage Alex in the kind of channels around the edge. I think I'd have set up similarly whether I had the initiative or not. In terms of where the ships go, though, it does make a difference. And any temptation I might have had to kind of separate everything out, try and flank with something, split Alex's list apart, I think the fact I'm moving first with almost everything means that it's far more sensible to just put them in a block and fly them together and kind of make them an intimidating thing for Alex to come towards, and almost try and put the difficult decisions on him when it comes to does he turn in or turn away.
Yeah, I think you've advocated a couple of times on this channel is, regardless of the list you have, if you are out initiative, consider flying your list in a block and sort of have the strength and safety in numbers.
Yeah, like don't keep trying to be the ace if you aren't the best aces out there, right? And all of Alex's ships, given the initiative, are better aces than mine. My Hera is moving after the 2 I4s of Alex, but that's one ship with a 2 dice gun firing at Inquisitors. That's not going to make the difference in this game. And actually, the thing I can leverage is my I3s and I4s as blockers, and that's going to be potentially huge because keeping them in a close formation, if I send one out the front to block Alex's, it's quite likely that will result in me lining up a Procket. And that's when, Prockets into Inquisitors that don't have defensive tokens. It seems like a good way for me to sort of try and win this game.
Absolutely. And Alex, same question to you, I guess. You've got ships that are arguably better knife fighters than the A-Wing, but you've got that kind of mix with 4 ships that can block you. So do you want to be fighting in narrow channels, or are you looking for a more spread out battle as well?
I kind of a bit of both, because obviously Vader does benefit from the open space for having his K-turn freed up, but that's also kind of why I bought gas clouds, because I'm not going to K-turn through a gas cloud on a turn that he's going to get shot, and be able to do that when he's disengaging or whatever potentially lets me control the board a lot better. And the Inquisitors, or the V1s specifically, are much better knife fighters. So I'm quite happy sort of having that fight in the rocks with them whilst having Vader kind of come in, hit something hard and then bug out again, or at least that was the plan. And then at the same time, if Paul is attacking the Inquisitors, they're probably going to give up points more slowly than A-Wings will, and they're both quite cheap. So if he's attacking them and leaving Vader alone, then I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah, it feels like the game for you is going to very much come down to how many of those Procket arcs do you dodge. Because, as you say, 2 dice primary shooting each other, you have the ability to get to force and evade, and he doesn't. So that certainly looks favourable, but it's the spike damage from the A-Wings that might make the difference here.
Yeah, like even with Focus and Evade, if he's going to get 2 or even 3 Prockets on one of my ships, it's going to take some damage.
Yeah, and so we see the opening turn here. Alex has set up Vader across from me. I'm not expecting him to come and joust me with a third of his list. Even Vader and Defender, that feels like a bad idea.
Jousting you with half his list if he does.
Yeah, that's true. Depends on whether you're talking about points or ships, but yeah, I take your point. But nevertheless, I've got to go somewhere. And what I don't want to do, or didn't want to do, was kind of assume that Alex wasn't coming in, turn my list down the bottom edge, and allow Vader to easily get onto my flank. That felt like a bad idea. So I think if I was going to turn down it, like the 1 hards would have been good. I could have turned back towards Vader next turn, or do what I did, which is just start to try and pressure him. And although the defenders are quick, the A-Wings are a little bit quicker. I mean, they've both got fast moves. They've both got the boosts. But he's going to have to hard turn away at this point, and I might be able to catch him in the next turn or so. Maybe grab some target locks, just put that bit of pressure on and make him start having to make decisions early in the game. So, Alex, you've turned away with Vader, and quite a nice move with those Inquisitors banking in gives them the option to go into the center of the board or down either board edge. At this stage, you're just sort of waiting to see what I do, or have you got an idea of where you want the fight to be?
Well, I ideally want you to start chasing Vader, and then kind of like both of our ships are about as fast as each other. But as soon as I sort of sense that you're going to give me an in to shoot one of your ships with 3 of mine, whilst avoiding the straight joust, that's what I'd be looking to turn in, or just look to sort of get the Inquisitors stuck in the middle, whilst Vader can then come in and take a flank.
Just as we go into this turn, Alex, so I obviously watched this game in real life. I'm watching it again now. I have a tendency sometimes to want to dive into an engagement sometimes, and sometimes only with 1 ship, and it doesn't tend to work out well, typically. Were you ever looking at a 5 forward with 5th here and just getting him into the flank of the A-Wings?
No, because at range 3, he's not realistically going to do anything, even with his ability, unless I get really lucky. And then he's sort of by himself and could potentially get picked off for very little gain. So I was always looking to keep the two V1s together until the fight kind of breaks out. So I sort of bank them in with the view to either being able to fly into the rocks quite quickly or bank away and get to the other side of the board quite quickly if I need to as well. So it basically depends. If Paul chases Vader around the big rock, then I was probably just going to kind of keep running for a little bit longer and try to wait for him to be a little bit outpaced so that then I could take that 3-on-1 that I was looking for. Or if he does turn into the rocks, then I've got the option to kind of go into the rocks with the Inquisitors whilst Vader takes like a bank and then perhaps kind of goes around behind them or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's very sensible, and like it's something I've kind of had to teach myself over the years of playing X-Wing, where what are your tendencies and what are the things that you do that give you bad outcomes. So for me, the opportunity to have a turn or so where I'm out positioning my opponent and getting shots into his flank looks really appealing, and I have to remind myself that at what cost? Like, what does the turn after that look like? And it might be that you have his fifth brother who's there taking on the entirety of Paul's list, which is disastrous.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely situations where that can be sort of advantageous, especially if it's like a very cheap flanker. Getting them to turn the whole list onto it can sometimes sort of leave their flank vulnerable, so it is worth doing. But with a really expensive ship like Vader, I'd have to be very sure that I wasn't going to be taking many shots to engage with just him.
And so we can see turn 2 coming in here. I am continuing to kind of chase Vader, not really with the expectation of catching him on his own and doing damage, given that Alex has turned away, but because this area of the board, this corner of the board feels pretty safe for me, and I'm not worried about kind of committing into it. One thing that I was a bit less certain about, it would have been nice to go straight and at least with these front two take locks on this turn. But I don't want to leave Hera in a position where she gets caught by these Inquisitors. And I was worried that if I 5 straight and stay where I was, then the 3 bank with Hera, which is what I've got dialed in, would run into the A-wings that had moved in front of her, and would sort of start to leave her at weird angles and in a bit of a sort of an odd spot. So that's why these guys have barrel rolled, and it means I don't get the target locks, but it's not a disaster, I don't think.
That's interesting because your initial fast move sort of made up my mind that I was going to like go as fast as I could with Vader and then bank up the left side of the board with the Inquisitors. If you'd gone a little bit slower, I might have turned back in to try and bait you to go for Vader, and then having the option to sort of turn away and go through the middle of the rocks. But kind of going fast initially, and I wanted absolutely nothing to do with all of those A-wings pointing at me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have preferred you to try and be clever and turn back in. I think there was much more likelihood of that going wrong for you. So maybe it would have been nice for me to kind of go a bit slower on that opening turn. The reason I went as fast as I did is it meant that I could hard turn around this rock in the top left-hand corner. If I'd gone a bit slower, then my hard turns and banks would have been blocked, and I'd have been kind of committed to going down that board edge. And whilst that's not a huge problem, I mean, I've gone straight down the board edge anyway. I never like in the game at all getting into a position where I've told you what I'm doing, right? If I'd gone 4 straight, I couldn't bank, I couldn't hard turn, I'm going straight. And I don't like, even in the opening of the game, being in a position where my opponent knows exactly what I'm going to do.
Mm.
And it's something I see people do quite a lot is, 2 turns into the game, they've given themselves one possible move, often as a result of an obstacle they've placed, cutting down all the rest. And it always feels a bit suboptimal to me.
Yeah, totally.
So, as we see ourselves sort of, wheeling around, I've managed to get a, moral victory, the target lock on Vader. I'm definitely winning at this point of the game. But I think it's a good opportunity to talk about Vader, right? People are obviously pretty interested, concerned, somewhere in between, about Vader and Defender.
Yeah, my first thought is like he's obviously just going to be the best ship in the game, and this is a mistake.
And so, just to explain it to everybody, why he's got force, but he can't spend it on defense. Why is the combination of things such a problem?
So for me, it's because defenders are like one of, if not the hardest ships to kill in the game. Like they get the free evade and they can take focus with it. So I'm not really worried about his defensive capability. He's got 4 shields, 3 hull, and 3 agility. So the amount of attacks that you need to even half him is, I don't know, something like 5 or 6 modded attacks, something like that on average. And having an ability that gives him such consistent offense really balances out the defensiveness of the defender chassis. And he's I6, so the general strategy would be to block him so that he doesn't get his defensive actions. But even then, he's still probably going to be getting 3 or 4 hits on his attack, and you're probably still going to struggle to take the shields off all at once in one round.
Yeah, and it's that combination, right? So defenders haven't seen a lot of play. They've been expensive, although obviously not quite as expensive as Vader's turned out to be. But I think the major difference is that the fact you don't need to, or you shouldn't need to take offensive actions, right? You should never need to target lock. You're only ever going to be target locking when you've nothing else to do with your action. And that means that, that focus evade that you're going to have for the majority of all games you play with him is going to be purely for defense. And as you say, it's going to take a lot of attacks. Something I'm acutely aware of coming into this game, I've obviously got the prockets, which can overwhelm your defense dice. If I roll 4 hits and you've got 3 evade dice, there's nothing you can do about it. But lining up prockets on something moving after you is not the easiest thing in the world. And my 2 dice guns are not going to do an awful lot. Probably a good opportunity to mention at least one of my pilot abilities. So you see green move there, that's Wedge. His pilot ability is very similar to his X-Wing pilot ability. I shall read it for you so that I don't make any mistakes. I don't want to be teaching people the wrong abilities on these new ships. But his ability is when you perform a primary attack, if the defender is in your front arc, the defender rolls 1 fewer defense dice. So obviously the X-Wing ability works on all attacks. This is only primary. And that front arc stipulation is because I'm not using them here today, but the new config for the A-Wings gives them the ability to potentially have a rear arc. Although, as I say, not using that in this game. He's my kind of other option. He's the ship I think that could scare you a little bit. Focus and evade is good, and unfortunately for me, my 2 dice attack, it's still, you're still going to average 2 evades even with a reduced agility. But Wedge, firing at you first, stripping some tokens, and it might leave you a little bit more vulnerable for these other A-Wings to follow up.
Yeah, absolutely. Wedge was one that I was kind of aware of the whole time, because even with the token stack, if he gets a range 1 shot, then odds are he's at least doing a shield, and a shield is quite a lot on ships that have 4 health, or less on 7 health. But yeah, the Inquisitors are quite vulnerable to him, especially if you do go all in on them and more or less ignore Vader.
So you see that turn, Hera continuing to chase Vader, sensibly running away, doesn't really want to get free shots into the back, however unlikely they are to do damage. And Hera ends up by ducking into these rocks with a range 3 shot into the side of Fifth Brother. Gets her 2 hits. Fifth Brother actually sitting there without tokens, so not impossible for me to do damage, but nice early evade dice. No problems there whatsoever. And we are now sitting, looking like we're probably about to get into the meat of the game, really. We'd circled for those first few turns, but Alex, looks like with Seven Sister at least, you're kind of going to have to turn towards my list a bit, or here are you just considering just running across the gas cloud?
Oh no! Like my plan here was to turn them in to tempt the A-Wings into attacking them, so that I could try and get that flank on Vader to get some sort of unanswered nice modded shots on you.
In terms of trying to sort of manufacture an end game, you said obviously Wedge is one of the more dangerous pieces. If you're looking to trade your 2 Inquisitors, how many A-Wings do you think you need to take out for Vader to have a winnable end game? Obviously, not assuming infinite time.
Well, I wouldn't be happy with trading the Inquisitors for any less than 3 A-Wings, really. Mainly because of the points. Like I want to trade up. Like 2.5, I'd probably live with. But if one of the remaining ones is Wedge and one of the remaining ones is Sabine, and they've got another one, then that could be problematic, because then they can sort of block with 1 and shoot with 2, and like potentially put the damage through turn after turn that way.
Yeah, and from my point of view, like it's all about a combination of points and time. Alex is right that the longer I spend trying to kill Inquisitors, the more chance Vader has to get away. And although Alex said he'd be worried if I had Sabine and wedged another one, I don't know if that's enough to seriously inconvenience Vader. So I kind of got a choice, I think. Do I try and go for Vader when I've got all 5 ships and can damage him with the sort of just weight of fire and can cause him problems and spread a net of arcs and make it difficult for him? And the plus of that is that's my best chance of dealing with Vader, and the downside is I don't really want to ignore these Inquisitors. Both have pilot abilities which can hurt A-Wings, and both are powerful ships in their own right. The other option, and the one I'm kind of thinking about given the board state, is the one I might go for here, is if I can kill the 2 Inquisitors and end up on points with not much time left in the game, I may never have to deal with Vader. And I think that's probably a more realistic prospect. If I get a couple of prockets on in an opening engagement, I could take an Inquisitor out quite quickly. And then all I really need to do is keep Vader honest, make sure that he can't get really high quality shots into me. And with my 3 agility and defensive tokens, I've got a reasonable chance of surviving long enough that I win on points. And so that's, given the position and given the fact that I think these Inquisitors are likely to turn in, that's kind of what I've gone for. So you can see here my I3 and I4 A-Wings all turning in. Sabine not quite getting into that lane through these obstacles, so rolling out. No, not in an ideal position. I'd prefer her not to be there, but at least potentially keeping Vader honest a little bit more threat as to where Vader is at the moment. And we can see Alex turning in here with his Inquisitors. Sensibly taking the evades, very defensive. I'm not sure how many of these guys are going to be shooting at each other. And Hera just wanting none of it. As I say, I was predicting the turn in, and with my A-Wings being a bit far back, I thought that rolling forward with Hera was just going to be trading 1 shot into 2, or maybe even 3 if Vader 3 hards here. So this felt like a sensible choice to kind of get out of dodge with Hera.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that you might do that. So I was sort of thinking that if Hera's sort of left out on her own, then I might be able to get that sort of 3-on-1 engagement that I was hoping for if you were a little bit more cautious with the other A-Wings. Also, I was sort of hoping to be able to maybe bait out one or 2 of your prockets on the Inquisitors, sort of banking that you wouldn't be able to get 2 lined up on the same one. And then you'd end up maybe spending your munitions for sort of very little return with the Force and the evade.
Yeah, and a K-turn here from Vader, I think that's a really good idea. I was hoping that you would continue to circle and try and get him on a flank. I think that would have been a bad plan, and obviously you're a good player and you didn't go for it. And with the white K-turn, able to boost in here, and you're going to have at least 1 shot on Hera, and maybe a second with 7th Sister there. Hera sitting with just the evade. Could take some damage here, don't really want her to, but certainly possible. Hera's not got a shot. Vader is out of her arc, so we open up with Vader's first shot. Rolls a hit and 2 focuses, spends his 2 force, and we get the first 3-hit attack roll from Vader this game. Probably not going to be the last.
I wonder if there should be a separate counter for that.
Yes, but nice early dice there from Hera. I spend the evade, and then we remember I get a 4th dice. So in a moment, I'm going to be rolling that to see if actually I can keep that evade. As I say, with a potential shot coming in here from 7th Sister, I'd quite like to keep the evade. But blank, no help. So the evade is spent, but importantly, no damage done from that Vader shot. And then, because I have initiative, we're down to my I4s. There's Wedge and Jake, who are green and yellow here. I'm starting with Wedge. And we can see that he has only got 5th brother in arc, which is a good situation for me. I think it's probably just these 2 trading fire, but if Jake also has 5th brother, maybe a possibility to do something, but not with 1 hit. Don't want to spend my focus to chase 1 hit into a ship that sat there on an evade token. Jake has no shot, and it's down to Alex's I4s.
I was going to say, I wonder if we forgot to use Wedge's ability on that round, but then, yeah, he didn't roll anything.
it would have been one hit into 3 dice with an evade, right? There was no point in risking it there.
A-Wings and Inquisitors shooting each other at range feel a little bit like a kind of like formal declaration for war, like when you write to a country and tell them you're going to go to war.
Yeah, but obviously Alex writes a more strongly worded letter because I have upsettingly, despite keeping that focus, my 4 blank dice, and I've taken an early shield, and these things happen, but it's not what I want to see in a match where I kind of went into it feeling like I was probably the underdog. I don't know what your assessment was, Lloyd, on that.
I think there's certainly a greater burden of execution on you, right? It sounds like both of your end games are fairly, expectation of the end game are fairly similar, right? You're both expecting Vader to be there, and it's whether you have enough resources left to deal with him or are ahead enough on points that you can just avoid him. You have the spike damage potential with Prockets that we spoke about, and so it kind of feels like those first passes with Prockets are going to be all important, because if you can get them off and you can take an Inquisitor off the board, then the damage race might swing in your favour, and if you don't get those Prockets off, then you might be in a lot of trouble. But from this position, it looks like you're in a very good place to get them. Like, you have all of your ships moving first, you can block all of the Inquisitor's choices. And so now it's just, can you get those shots lined up and get the meaningful damage into the ships? Because it doesn't feel like the Inquisitors have many choices about where they're going other than into this fight.
Yeah, and I was going to say exactly that. We are in the game now. There is bound to be more firing next turn than there was this. And I like my position, and the reason I like my position is that my I4s move before Alex's I4s. So I've got a high chance of getting some blocks here, and hopefully maybe even getting some Prockets into these Inquisitors. Alex, from that point of view, are you then worried given the board state, or have you got a kind of plan to get out of this?
Not really. Like, as you'll see in a sec, like I ended up going for the sort of broadly disengaging with everybody, with then a view to kind of turning back around and coming after you from whichever direction you didn't end up going in, if that makes sense. So I was kind of figured maybe you'll just sort of fly into the middle of the board. So I'm banking out with the Inquisitors and then just hard turning away with Vader, so that then he can, in theory, boost and be behind the gas cloud with an evade. So fairly minimal risk. And then he has the option to sort of K-turn and come back into the fight again the next following turn. And then same with Inquisitors. But then, if I remember correctly, your position, the A-Wings, sort of hankers that plan a little bit. And we end up fighting anyway.
Yeah, so from my point of view, as I say, I like this engagement. The things that make it slightly tricky for me are the gap that Wedge, Hobby, and Jake are coming through is really narrow. The 2 straight, I think, from Hobby at the back there puts him very, very close and possibly on that gas cloud, which I don't want. I don't want a tokenless, maybe strained Hobby sitting at the back of this. And my initial plan is just to 5 straight and boost with Jake, get his free focus, and sit, I think, probably slap bang between the central gas cloud and the rock in the bottom right-hand corner. And I don't actually think that gives you many moves that don't bump into that, certainly not with Seventh Sister. And if everybody else comes in, I think that's favourable for me. But the longer we take planning this turn, the more I think about it and the more fancy I try to get. And I get very fixated on getting 2 actions, 2 focuses out of Jake. So got to play hopscotch here. That my I3 moves first. So I had to do the 3 straight to come over the top of Wedge. Sabine just come around the corner. She's there to kind of just get into a nice position, give her options for next turn, and give her some fire. And then this is where it starts to go wrong. I wasn't confident the 2 straight fit over the top. I think actually in hindsight probably did. So I went for the 3. And what I wanted to do here was evade and leave Wedge in a position where he could get a focus from Jake and boost in between these 2 obstacles. Because he can't do that, I barrel roll him to free up the position for the boost. But in doing so, this is me describing a car crash that I've created. But in doing so, I'm now in Jake's way. And I've also, this whole turn, I think, is kind of predicated on a mistake by myself. Like, Jake can generate 2 focuses, but if he wants to take one of them himself, he has to take the focus of his own barrel roll, and then his boost is the action that gives his wingmate a token. And as it is, there are no boost possibilities now. With Wedge in that position, he can't boost. So I barrel roll. I still want Wedge to get this action and to boost because I don't like the blocking position I'm in. I didn't like it at the time, although now I think it's fine. And Wedge goes ahead and takes that focus and boosts around the corner. But I've left Jake in an awful position. At the time, I didn't like the barrel roll to the left, and now I couldn't tell you why. I think I'd be much happier if Jake was out to the left with no token. And as we can see here, 7th system moving first, fits beautifully into that gap and is now sitting in front of a tokenless Jake.
Yeah, I think it would have been better for you if you'd left Wedge where he was in the end.
Yeah, absolutely, in hindsight. The reason I didn't was because of Vader. And what I'm expecting you to do with Vader is one of the 3 banks. I don't know whether you're going to 3 bank left or right, but I think you're 3 banking. I wasn't expecting the disengage which you described. And in this position here, even though Jake's in a bad place, I still don't hate it because both 3 banks are now blocked and the non-blocking ship is going to get a shot on you. And that's kind of how I've got to play if I want to damage Vader. So I don't hate it. Jake is in a very bad spot. But it might be okay as long as I get Vader. But as you can see here, the 3 hard was a really well thought out move. And now you just get to evade up, decide whether you need to boost out of arc from Wedge or not. And I've really not got a lot of decent shots. And I've sat my best A-wing in front of you with no tokens. So yes, that was me turning a really nice opening position into a horrible position this turn just by trying to do too much with Jake.
And Alex, from your side, so you had both of your Inquisitors with 3 banks. Now, presumably when you set them, the plan was that 5th brother in red would go first and then boost out, and then 7th would follow. And obviously what you've done is swap that ordering because it gives you shots with both. And I think that's something that's really easy to miss.
Yeah, because I figured if 5th brother went first, then he might have bumped into Jake, whereas 7th sister would fit. So then he bumps into her and then allows me to shoot Jake with both of them, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like such a minor thing, but it is really easy to miss. And is the kind of thing that separates decent players from very good players, giving yourself the option to self-bump your ships back to increase your number of shots. So I just wanted to make sure we called that out so people that are watching and wanting to get better can have that in mind.
Yeah, and to really hammer that point home, had 5th move first, we'd be sitting here with 5th bumped into the front of Jake with no shot, 7th bumped into the back of 5th with a shot onto Jake but no token, and both sitting looking pretty vulnerable to Hobby there who's following up. Instead of that, we've got 2 shots going into a tokenless Jake, one of which the Inquisitor has a focus token, so a much, much better situation. Hera started off this round. She fired a speculative thread tracer, did get the 3 hits, but Vader able to roll just enough, roll 2 evades and added his evade token to end up not taking locks. It would have been nice. I think I would have got locks with almost the entire list, maybe everyone, but didn't happen. And now we're down to Jake. So I sit here, I'm and R a bit about whether, given that Vader has no defensive tokens, unable to spend his force on defense, whether I should shoot at him. I think where he is, I could have decided that it wasn't obstructed. But as he had no mods and it would be maximum 2 shots into Vader, I thought that trying to do some damage to an Inquisitor was a better option. And what I'm trying to do is get them to spend some of their offensive tokens and maybe keep Jake alive. But it didn't come off. I only rolled 1 hit into 2 evades. And these Inquisitors, 5th and 7th, both have all of their force left over, and 7th has a focus. So we start off with 7th spending that focus for 2 hits. More sub-average dice there from Jake, halved already. Taking this range 1 shot still has a chance because you've only got the force, which you spend for 2. And another blank out, and that is a dead Jake. So, bad dice, certainly. Definitely could have lived through that. But the reason he is dead is because instead of 5-straighting, boosting, and blocking up almost your entire list, I got clever, in inverted commas, and hung him out to dry. So entirely my fault. And I don't really have an awful lot to show for this turn. We're going to see the final shot here from Hobby. 2 hits, but Alex rolls just enough, spends that second force on 5th brother, and doesn't take any damage. And this is already looking bad for me. I was not happy at this point. I was really kicking myself for a pretty fundamental mistake. I overcomplicated things. I had a plan, changed it at the last minute, didn't really think it through, and was trying to get too many ships to fit into too small an area of the board, which is, I don't know about you, but that's how a lot of my bad plans start.
Yeah, same.
It's like this thing's gonna, and then that's gonna be able to barrel roll just in front of him, and then and then it sort of all goes wrong. And now I'm saying here, even with these new guys who I think his abilities are good, I would still class Jake as the best rebel A-wing in the game, and he is no longer in this game.
Yeah, I was very happy with this.
I'm not surprised. Lloyd, have I just lost?
Well, you've given up what felt like your best opportunity to get some pockets into tokenless ships. So you've definitely given yourself some work to do, for sure. I suppose, looking at best case scenarios, 3 of your ships can turn into the place where the Inquisitors are still going to be next turn. The shots probably aren't going to be quite as good, certainly from Hera following in. But either you're going to be chasing some Inquisitors or you're going to be blocking them and getting shots into them. So you've got some potential to work your way back in, but that does leave a very large Vader-sized problem in the side of your list. And you've not really got very much that can pressure him or make him think about doing anything other than just taking easy shots into you.
Yeah, I think what's in my favour is the position. So these guys turning in are both going to end up with their bullseyes in the general direction that Alex is moving in. Hera's going to come around the side, also have the boost available to her if she wants it. So I think that there's a non-zero chance of me getting a bullseye here. Certainly Alex is going to have to take into account where those bullseyes are going to end up. So I didn't feel too bad about that. But Vader is a problem. I think at the moment, probably going to K-turn, and at least with that gas cloud in the way, he's not going to do too much. But certainly if I don't deal with these Inquisitors, at least one of them in the next couple of turns, then Vader's going to be right in the thick of things, and I'm going to be in trouble. We see the K-turn there.
Being so unexpectedly up also allowed me to be a lot more aggressive with the Inquisitors this turn than I probably otherwise would have been, which is why I did sort of turnaround moves with both of them. And obviously Fifth Brother would have bumped into one of your A-wings if I'd let him go second. So I let him go first, so he'd stayed put and had reduced incoming fire. And then K-turned with Seventh Sister, because I'm kind of thinking like, well, they're probably not going to take much damage, if any, but I can keep that pressure up and try and get some extra cheeky points in.
Yeah, I also like it again for just the position that leaves you in next turn, right? You've now got Paul making choices with those 2 A-wings, Sabine and Derek, as to which Inquisitor they want to try and deal with next turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and for the second time in 2 turns, we see the power of having your ships moving at the same initiative. So if you'd had to move 7th first, 5th would now be sat on Derek's nose, taking a range 1 shot from Sabine, and potentially taking some damage. Hera could have followed up, but as you say, actually able to stay back, still in Sabine's arc, but certainly with a shot of his own and in a much nicer position. We get a 2 dice Hera shot here into 5th. Vader just out of range. Actually managed to chip a damage through, which is quite nice. And then Vader here with a choice of shots, either Derek or Wedge, both at range 3, both through gas clouds. Goes for Wedge, because I think accurately identified that he's the bigger threat. Spends 1 force. Could have spent 2 for the 3 hits, but sensibly decides not to, given the low likelihood of hitting, and plenty of evades there from Wedge to take no damage.
Yeah, I think if the shots had been unobstructed, I would definitely have shot Derek, but through a gas cloud at range 3, it's very unlikely to do damage.
Yeah. And speaking of unlikely to do damage, we've got 2 dice here from Derek. I think maybe shooting slightly out of order. He is an I3, and I don't think your Inquisitors have shot left yet. But gets the 2 hits. Ums and ahs about spending the focus, and does so. But 2 natural evades there from 7th. So now sitting with a fair bit of incoming fire and no defensive token. Sabine, again an I3. Obviously forgot how the game worked for this turn. Apologies, viewers. Firing at range 1. But blanks out. Sabine's ability is essentially a combination of Fearless and Concord Dawn. If she is range 1 in the front arc of the ship she's attacking, she gets to change any results to a hit. And that works not only on her primary, but on secondary weapons as well. And defensively, if she is range 1 in the arc of the attacker, she gets to change any result to an evade. So we remember at this point to take these I4 Inquisitors shots. 5th opens up with hit crit, but Derek luckily getting the 2 natural evades. And then just this 2 dice shot from 7th, 1 hit into 1 evade. But at this point, Alex able to use 7th Sister's ability to force that damage through. And in the end, with rolling no focus on defense, we probably end up at the same outcome despite our mix-up with the attack order.
Again, worth noting that self-bump from Fifth Brother turned Sabine's ability off on offense and defense.
Absolutely, because he didn't turn that corner. Although she's at range 1, she's not in his front arc, so no conversion on attack. Defense didn't matter, but at range 1, shooting into a 1 force, Fifth Brother who had already taken a shield, blanked out or maybe rolled 1 focus and was not able to do any further damage. And my idea that I needed to take an Inquisitor off the table early is still true, but I haven't really got any closer to doing it. I don't mind the position of Wedge here. I think he gives Vader something to think about. But Vader certainly is now going to be a scary prospect for at least Hera. And I don't really have many options for keeping arcs on these Inquisitors.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see the way people play Vader, and obviously we have Alex doing it here. A single A-Wing, even Wedge with this ability, shouldn't necessarily present a very big threat to Vader, not least on a single turn. Over multiple turns, I suppose, has the ability to chip damage into. I wonder, just because of the cost of Vader, whether people will fly him more conservatively.
And that was certainly my thought, because he's so expensive. The temptation to just sort of joust and see what happens was there, though. If it wasn't being recorded, I probably would have done that.
It's one of those, isn't it, where you could just throw him into 2, 3, maybe even 4 A-Wings, and it should be fine. But because of his points cost, the consequence if it goes wrong is massive, and it will be interesting to see the balance. We'll see at the end of this game. It's going well for you, but so far it's really your good Inquisitor play versus my suboptimal A-Wing play is what's winning the game for you. And Vader has been a distraction more than a real force. Now, obviously, that might change as the game goes on, but it will be interesting to see with people flying Vader whether they're getting his points worth out of him. Certainly he's scary, certainly he's powerful, but are people able to really leverage all of that and get this 100+ point ship to earn those points back? So we're getting my A-Wings into position here. Sabine didn't have many options. I thought the best I can manage was some blocks. Do get that, but it means that I don't have a shot this turn unless Vader does something unexpected. K-turn, slightly unusual for A-Wings. You don't see them do their red moves very often, but I'd quite liked the position it put Hobby in. Hobby has the ability to shed stress when he acquires or spends a target lock. That could come into play with the thread tracers, but I'm not sure that's a massively good ability. Essentially, I think A-Wings are easily capable of getting rid of their stress, and so it fails very situational. And he's in this list because his points worked out for him to fit, whereas Shara Bay, who I might have considered otherwise, didn't.
That was me trying to take a lock with Fifth Brother and pressing Vader's dial by accident.
Yeah, that's what he claims. That's what he claims he is. A bit of free information. But yeah, 5th turning out. I thought that was quite confident. Sat there, he's taking potentially 2 shots. And I definitely would have been inclined to evade that. Did you not think Hera's coming in, or do you just not think Hera can do any damage to you?
No, I thought that Hera would be going forwards to try and get a shot on Vader. So I was just like, well, I'm not going to get shot, really, so what's the point of taking an evade?
That's fair. I wondered when I set the moves whether this boost from Wedge was going to block the move from Vader. As we can see, it's not, but Vader's ended up sat right in front of Wedge, and that's the reason that I sort of didn't go for Vader. I thought that a single modded Hera shot was unlikely to do anything, and I'm trying to focus down the one ship that I've done some damage to, and I've got at least a bit force starved in Fifth Brother.
Yeah, I mean that's the much more sensible play than what I, for whatever reason, thought you were going to do.
So having said all that, when I go to take the range one shot, we realise that Fifth Brother actually should be on full force. So given that I've already kind of decided that Wedge needs to take the opportunity to shoot Vader, I decide that the better shot is to focus fire on 7th. One, because Hobby's got a range one shot on her, and two, because stripping some of her force may help to keep Hera alive. But it didn't matter. No damage was done, and Vader then takes his shot. Spends a force to change a blank to a hit. That feels like a good ability, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it?
Gets the full string and spend my evade to only take 2 shields and a crit. And that is reduced agility. So I now have a 1 health, 2 agility Hera. And this game does not look like it's going well for me. But I do have a procket onto Vader. And I really need this to hit big. So we've got a single modded procket here. Average is 4 hits. Vader is, unfortunately, with his 2 tokens, going to average 3 evades. And Wedge's ability does not work on proton torpedoes. We had a bit of a chat about whether my primary attack had a higher chance of hitting, given that I would reduce Vader's agility. I have a bit of a look to see whether actually 7th is in range, and she is not. So kind of shooting Vader is really my only option. And I go with the prockets. I think they probably do slightly more damage, and also they've obviously got the potential to spike more damage if Alex gets a bad roll. And we both end up under average. And I plink through the 1 damage that I think was the maximum I was ever really going to realistically get. And that felt bad, That was my procket. That was lined up. And I've done 1/7 of Vader's health with that. So I need 6 more prockets to kill him.
An I4 procket that you lined up, about perfectly into a ship that can boost and barrel roll, and you get 1 shield out of it. Definitely feels bad.
Yeah, and we see there just the defensiveness of the defender, right? Like Alex could have boosted out of that. Would still have taken the range 1 shot from Wedge and wouldn't have had the focus token. So I think the right choice to stay there. But there's not many ships in the game that can just elect to stay there and get procketed and be fine.
Yeah, my thinking at the time was like, I don't know if the boost still gives me the shot on Hera, and I want to be doing more damage, and I can afford to take a couple of shields if it comes to it.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely the right decision. Luckily for me, 7th Sister unable to kill my 2 agility Hera, so she is at least still alive at this point. But then Derek, perhaps unsurprisingly, unmodded, does no damage to 7th Sister. And in that turn, I traded most of Hera for 1 shield on Vader. And I don't feel like I'm nearer to winning.
Yeah, I remember this round. It felt feeling kind of bad.
So probably a good point, I think, to talk about the kind of new ships in general. Lloyd, you watch this live and you'll be able to be rewatching it now as we're talking. We'll start off with the A-Wings, and I'm sure we'll get to Vader at some stage during the game.
I think most of the A-Wing abilities are interesting, maybe apart from Derek's. I think that's incredibly niche, as you said. I think Sabine's ability might be the most interesting of them, especially if you can get prockets off, and the ability to double mod them, again, makes those prockets incredibly scary. Now, she's doing that at I3, so you're going to have to potentially work hard to line those shots up. But if and when you get them, they should be incredibly valuable. And she's also arguably the most offensive of the A-Wings because, again, of her ability. So I think Sabine is the real star here, though we've not necessarily seen it from her yet in this game. I think the A-Wing has so far in second edition been best as a support piece. And I think that still continues. Jake is, as you said earlier, probably still the best A-Wing. Hera's ability is pretty well priced for an incredible support ability. So I think they all have a place. but I don't necessarily know that 5 A-Wings is the place for it.
I suppose if you're running 5 A-Wings, you always have to have that thought. It's like, is 5 resistance A-Wings better?
Yeah, and I think that's a really reasonable thought. And I think the answer probably is that yes, the 5 resistance A's is better. I kind of agree and disagree with you, Lloyd. I think that you're right. I think Sabine's ability is interesting and probably in a vacuum the most powerful. I think Hera's is really good actually, and I've not shown it very well here, but we did before points came out kind of have a guesstimating practice game so that we didn't go into this completely. Although it doesn't look like it, we were attempting to not go into this looking like complete newbies with the ships. And the ability with Hera to take an evade and either force people to shoot Hera, which with her I6 may not be a possibility. She's got a good ability to evade arcs, and then taking that evade means that any other ship in your list is focus evaded. And if you've got focus evaded A-wings, they don't take much damage. So that Hera's ability is incredible, I think, but I am not making the most of it here. And I think the reason for that is that I'm getting Hera shot a lot, and she's sort of just been out of range too when I have needed her.
Yeah, I think I'd rather have a focus evaded X-wing wedge antennas shoot Hera.
But I suppose that's where I'm going to maybe slightly differ. Is I think if you want to play Sabine, and I think if you want to play Wedge, who's also got certainly an interesting ability, an ability that makes that A-wing a little bit more relevant than any of the other named ones would be, that actually there aren't many other choices than this 5A list. Hera certainly has a role as a support ship, but I'm not sure she's better than Jake, and in fact think she's probably not as good. So I can't see a list where you're taking Hera and Jake, and I can't really see a list where you're taking Hera instead of Jake, unless you're really, really good at sort of maximizing what you get out of an I6 ship. And there are players who are. And with the rest of them, they just don't really feel like they fit. Like the question for any of these A-wings when you pick them into a list is, why aren't you taking Jake instead? And I think the only reasonable answer for that is because you've already taken Jake. So I agree with you on which are the better abilities, but I think I disagree with you on the 5A list, and I think it's the only list that you run most of them in. But it'll be interesting to see how people kind of solve that problem. Get some moves coming in here. Limited options from the A-wings. I went back and forth with a few different plans. Sort of, do I dive through gas clouds to try and get shots on Vader? But it all felt a bit desperate. So in the end, the only way of getting Sabine turned around and keep her relevant was to bump Hobby. That means yet another turn from Hobby where he's got no tokens, which is not a good way of damaging Inquisitors. Wedge continues to be in a nice position, but Hera really at this stage just running for her life, turning around that rock, taking her evade and hoping that will keep her alive with her 1 health and reduced agility. And Defender's K-turn, Alex.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
Yeah, it feels like you've got a nice channel there to just pretty much roll up and down for as long as you want to, if that's the way you decide you want to keep using Vader.
Yeah, exactly. And like the temptation to try and chase Hera was there, but if she went the other way, then Vader's basically out of position for at least 2 turns, and there's very little gain from it. Whereas this way, I at least get a shot on another A-wing to try and keep that momentum up.
Yeah, and we see that Vader's ability coming to play. You roll hit, focus, blank, spend 1 force to change the focus to a hit, and spend another force to change the blank to a hit. Into Wedge rolls, average evade dice. That is not enough. And I'm an here about whether I spend the focus or not. I've already taken 1 damage. So this is a choice between taking a single shield or a shield and a hit. And I take the shield and a hit, and that's because I'm kind of feeling desperate, right? I've got my range 1 shot onto 7th Sister, and I want modifications for it, because if I don't, I'm never going to damage anything.
Yeah, and Hera being just out there as well was a bit unfortunate.
So starting off with Wedge here, do take the range 1 shot. Should have spent the focus, don't get to spend it on attack. And 2 agility, only 1 paint, blank focus, but has an evade and the force, and doesn't take any damage.
Yeah, I debated saving it to try and get the kill shot on Hera, but decided it was better to just wait until later.
Yeah, I feel like you both had a similar decision to make, and Paul chose to take the damage. and you chose to not to. And I think both of you were right, because, Alex, from your situation, you are fairly comfortably ahead, and none of your ships are in a lot of danger, so you can afford to be conservative. Whereas Paul, just looks like it's slipping away from you fast, so you almost can't afford to be conservative. You have to kind of go for big plays.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the one who needs a big swing. I'm the one who needed to get hit crit into a Blanco and surprise kill Seventh Sister to stay in the game. But that has not happened.
And then Fifth Brother using his ability there to shoot Hobby and then get a sneaker crit through with his ability.
Yeah, so everything going south quickly for me here. As you say, Hobby taking the last shield and then the added crit, which is a console fire. And at least some silver lining for me. Hera not dying. Now down to my modless A-Wings. Sabine shooting. Blanks, which is not going to help. Then we get the console fire, which triggers, and Hobby is a dead man walking. Does get his range 1 shot before he leaves. It might just be range 2, in fact. 2 hits is nice. Into a single force Inquisitor. And 2 evades, and no more damage done. So this is going south. In that turn, Wedge went to 1 health. Hobby died from 3 health. And I did no further damage. And I think at this point the game is lost. It's 3 ships versus 3, and all of Alex's ships have better abilities than all of mine. I think that's fair to say, Lloyd.
Yes, I think it might be at this stage.
So we're looking at 3 force wielding ships that are going to be able to have mods if they bump, have double mods on defense if they don't. Points wise, I need to take some points off Vader. Killing both Inquisitors, I think, is not enough at this stage. And that looks very unlikely to happen. But they're new ships. I am actually really enjoying the A-Wing list, despite how things are going. They're maneuverable ships. They've each got their own little kind of individual abilities that makes them feel different from each other. And trying to catch these Imperial ships is a kind of an interesting challenge. I think I've been keeping arcs on quite nicely, but certainly the mistake in that opening engagement, I've never quite been able to kind of compensate for. Alex has done a really nice job of just playing safe from that point. Alex, so we were talking about the A-Wings. Good opportunity here to talk about Vader. You've flown him in this game. Is he as good as we thought he might be?
I think so, yeah. There's nothing that has happened in this game that's made me think, oh, maybe the hype was a little bit too much. So I suppose we were talking about this a little bit when we were actually playing. The real strength of this list is that being able to take the Inquisitors with Vader is actually quite strong and you kind of can't ignore them. They sort of feel like they'd be easy points, but because of the Force and the easy access to the evade, it's actually really hard to put damage on them as well. So you've got basically 3 really difficult to damage ships, and they all do contribute with abilities or accurate attacks in some way.
Yeah, that was my thought too. Lloyd, any sort of dissenting opinion there, or?
No, unfortunately, I think Alex's list here is really strong. I did have a thought about your A-Wings. So you said obviously the individual pilot abilities is quite nice and does make them feel unique. Do you prefer this list over Snap Crack A-Wings? You could run 5 Green Squadron Snap Crack A-Wings. You could also, of course, run them with Prockets and, for example, Marksmanship and Deadeye Shot. Do you think that feels better or just different or worse than these named ones?
I think I'd probably go different. Snapcrack is an interesting problem for your opponent's list. And Vader, actually, of these guys, might need to be slightly worried about it, although depend very much on who had initiative. If Vader's moving first, he's still going to get his evade before the snapshot happens. I like the spike damage. I've been running a lot of Han, Jake, and something with Prockets on Jake. And I think the Prockets kind of transform the A-Wing. And I think that is why people may consider taking these guys over the Resistance ones. Because I think you can fit the named guys, the higher initiative guys, with Prockets more easily than you can in the Resistance. It felt fun. You've got a load of named characters. They've been prominent in the shows they were in. They felt like individual characters. It felt like a real fun list to play. But it didn't feel like a super powerful list, whereas Alex's list feels very, very strong. We see Vader here now with easy choices, K-turning and boosting in behind Wedge. Another 4 hits. Wedge with 2 evades is dead before he shoots. And that's me checking there to see whether I could have passed the evade, not that it would have made a difference. And another A-wing goes down. I do have a procket lined up, which is nice. If Sabine survives, which she should do, because she's actually not taken any damage yet. She is going to at least be able to put a procket into Fifth Brother. He's a shield down already. But at this point, that's really just a consolation prize. Fifth firing at range 1, rolling 2 focus, sitting on force evade, decides not to spend. Obviously, with all of that offense coming in, that's a very sensible decision. Alex not needing to chase the game, as we've said. And then we're down to the 7th Sister shot. 1 hit into 1 evade, but for at least a second, if not the 3rd time this game, 7th Sister able to use her ability to crack that. I didn't want to spend the focus clearly because I wanted to fire my prockets. And Sabine takes the damage. Got this procket coming up.
And yeah, obviously 7th Sister fairly safe to use her force when the procket is there for Fifth Brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And procket coming up, using Sabine's fearless-like pilot ability to get those 5 hits. Could have spent the focus. I get excited, thinking that I've got 3 hits through. And then Alex reveals the evade and just the 2 damage. So Fifth Brother alive on 1 health, and I'm not even able to take him off the table. Yeah, going back to what we were saying about the lists, I think that turn is an excellent example that whilst Vader is incredibly powerful, Fifth Brother and 7th Sister are as well. You know, I've got 3 ships in this list, none of which are easy to damage, all of which can punch damage through my 3 agility ships. Feels like a bit of a nightmare. And I think, you know, as I said at the start, what I needed to do was block them and procket them. And once I'd failed to do that, the writing was on the wall. So are there other options? I mean, I'm certain there are. What could people do, Lloyd, if taking 3 agility, single modded 2 dice guns is not the answer to Vader? What might be?
Well, I don't know that it's not. I think had your engage gone better, you had a real opportunity to burn down 1 or 2 Inquisitors. Had you blocked them with your front ships and then fired prockets into them with your back ships, you had a real chance to either kill them or put them on fire, and then have the ability to finish them off potentially with a Hera in a future turn. And once you're numerically up on Vader, once Vader needs to chase a game, I think it becomes much easier, because then he needs to be predictable, he needs to turn in. And that's the point at which you can block him and chip shots into him. So, as much as we talked about perhaps a list imbalance in this game, I think had you not gotten a bit too clever with your opening engagement, this could have been a very different game.
So we have a bit of a technical issue at this point in the stream. I have to reload from a save state, and the game continues as normal, but Vader's arc, unfortunately, is stuck to the board and is going to remain there for the rest of the game. So apologies for that, viewers. Yeah, that's interesting what you're saying, Lloyd, and I think that's fair. That you're right. The weakness of the Defender is it's predictable. And one of the really nice things Alex has done this game is to keep Vader on the periphery of the fight and never really put him in a place where his options were limited, you know. So had I rolled through these Inquisitors, got some nice procket shots and taken them off the board, then with enough ships left, I can block his escape options and get shots in with the remaining ships. And Alex prevented me from doing that really nicely. Looking at the board as it is now, although the game is gone, this is probably my first opportunity to actually get in Vader's way. Vader sitting facing the rock here. The K-turn would be over it, although is certainly in my mind something that Alex might be considering, so something I have to kind of play around. The turns out to the right are either the 1 hard, which is stressful and can be easily blocked by Hera, or again through the rock, which feels bad. So I'm kind of feeling like Vader is almost forced to go into the center of this cluster here. And this is a position where if all 4 of these ships were mine, I'd be feeling pretty happy. I mean, as it is, when only 2 of them are mine, I probably can't capitalize on it. But yeah, I think hope is not lost. And the answer, as it always is with any piece of the game that people think is very powerful is to play better. And if I had played better, I'd have had a much better chance. So I agree. Playing better would have helped. If people don't want to run 5 A-Wings, but do want to have a chance against Vader, is there a different archetype that might be slightly easier, slightly less burden of execution?
I think there's probably quite a few options. I think, as much as I hate to advocate them, Foresight Inquisitors probably cause him some issues just because of the number of overlapping arcs and shots you can potentially get into him. And it's probably not easy for him to score quick points. Any I6s moving after him are going to cause him issues as well. So he's already very expensive. And we've seen here with Alex's list, I think he's very good. This list is already quite expensive and has no upgrades in it. So there's really no room to cut things down until you start making the list substantially worse by swapping out one of the named Inquisitors for perhaps a generic Inquisitor. So, yeah, I6s that are bidding harder. So, like a Han moving afterwards, imagine, for example, would, I suspect, cause Vader a lot of issues. He's going to get very, very low time on target against a Han who can boost away. And then anything that has a high enough ship count to block him and reliably get guns on. Plus, then again, automatic damage. So, auto blasters, bombs. There are certainly answers in the game and in the meta. And we've seen a few times in the game where we've had something that has felt oppressive or too powerful or too cheap, that the meta and the people playing the game adjust to it. So when we saw Ensnare Nantex came out and nobody had an answer for how to beat them, the meta shifted heavily and we saw big ships. When we had dual fire sprays recently doing well in lots of tournaments, we saw a rise in resistance beef because that's a really hard game for it. So there will be answers in the meta for sure. And if we see Vader having huge amounts of success and being ever present on top tables, the community will adjust.
Yeah, I think they're fair points. I wonder how much of a problem for Vader Han would be. So I agree with you that with the kind of more high ship count swarmy lists that you can definitely cause him trouble. I worry with aces that outbid him. I think if you're going to do that, you need more than one I6, because one guy moving after him, getting a good shot, not getting shot at, is fine, but it's not likely to do damage. So I think that for Han to worry Vader, you also need Wedge in the list. Now you can do that. If you get Han and Wedge and Hera, and you move after Vader, then yeah, you're gonna cause him trouble. But I think one I6 ace outbidding him is going to be much less of a problem. So yeah, I think for newer players or players struggling against him, I might go toward the swarm rather than the I6s. But
auto blasters in particular are going to give him a hard time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the other thing that Lloyd said, and I'd forgotten about. But yeah, the auto damage, I completely agree. The auto damage is definitely a solution. So I said I was worried about that K-turn from Vader. So I went to block it with Sabine. Again, no mods, not ideal, but this felt like it was a place that she wasn't going to get shot at by the Inquisitors and might get some shots on or indeed block Vader. As it is, Vader attempted to escape in. And I think here, you said at the time, it probably should have boosted Seventh Sister forward and Vader would have cleared there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, towards the end of the game that you've already won with arcs stuck to the board, getting meaning that we can't see things as clearly like the rocks and things. I think that's part of the reason. But as it is, Vader is now bumped, so we're going to see, does bumping Vader make a difference? Hera opens up with hit crit. I spend my token because Hera is dead here, taking 2 shots with no agility. Oh, and a nice opening there from Vader. 0 paint. Even had he rolled focuses, his pilot ability, meaning he's not going to be able to spend his force on defense, and takes 2 shields. 1 off half. I might score some more points this game.
Yeah, that was me thinking like, well, 1 blank out. I'm not going to blank out again, and even if I do, Sabine's probably not going to roll 3.
Yeah, and we get the downside of that move with Hera. That evade was carried over from last turn, not on the ship, and 1 hit coming through from one of the Inquisitors there is enough to take her off the table. And now Sabine, seeing if she can follow up. Got choices here, but Vader at range 1 with no tokens, 1 off half, felt like the thing to go for. No mods. Bit of a Hail Mary, so it's going to be 3 dice into 3. Vader not pointed at Sabine, so she's not going to get fearless. Only rolls the 1 crit. But there we go, Vader blanks out again. And that's half points. Easy as that. In fact, if I get a better attack roll there, Alex, I could have killed you.
Indeed. It was definitely possible. So yeah, the trick is to just wait until Vader blanks out.
Yeah. So, a kind of silly dice there, not a greatly thought through move from Alex, which is to say, it's just because it was the end of the game. He had outplayed me up to this point for sure. And even with me halving Vader, he's killed Hera. He is not going to lose this game. 2 blank outs is uncommon, but maybe there's some hope there, right? Like that does show that the blocks are going to be important. Once you're just relying on your 3 agility, you're going to take some damage. And when you cost this many points, your opponent's halving you is going to be important. So kind of slightly funny into the game. We're going into the last turn here. And for me, it's at this point all about, can I kill something? Can I take someone off the board? And feel slightly better about the last 75 minutes. And I think we're kind of getting there in terms of talking about the ships. We talked about Vader a lot. Alex, when you looked at it, did you look at the other defenders? Was that something that you considered? Or are the new defenders just Vader and some noise?
Well, the other defenders are they're still good. Like Vader plus one of the other defenders, no upgrades, just didn't sound terribly interesting. So I thought that the Inquisitors would be pretty good because they do quite good at what the defenders are bad at, which is sort of staying in close, knife fighting, and they don't care as much if they bump because they've got the Force and their abilities are really good. Plus, just having something at I4 seemed quite good with a lot of the I3s and 2s around. And not necessarily building specifically for your A-Wing list, but just kind of in general. I thought that it might be quite a good option after sort of mulling it over a bit.
Yeah, it feels like that the Inquisitors cover Vader's weaknesses really nicely, don't they? If you hit a swarm, you've got a list with 3 aces in it, stuff that can tank up in the same way that Vader can and not take much damage. And then if you do run into these triple I6 lists that might cause Vader some problems, or you've got 2 incredibly good blockers and 2 ships that against those high agility aces can punch the damage through. So going into the final couple of turns here, take the bump with Sabine, as it seems to be the best option for getting a shot. Vader getting out of there, and we see whether Sabine is going to live to take these shots. Lloyd, whilst we see the shots coming through, at this point, I think not particularly interesting as the game is long gone. We've talked about Vader. I think in our next episode, we're going to have you taking the scum stuff off against Dale with some of the new interceptors. So maybe the only thing that we're not going to see on the channel in the next couple of weeks is the B-Wings. When I was looking at them, I just kind of thought they weren't as good as the pre-existing B-Wings and moved on. Am I wrong? Is there something I'm missing?
Well, if I tell you that I've never flown a B-Wing in 2nd edition, does that give you an idea of my level of excitement for them?
Yeah. So for the viewers, there's Hera with the same pilot ability, and that is certainly an ability that is better on a cheaper A-Wing than it is on a more expensive B-Wing. And there is someone else, and I can't even remember who it was. And I just didn't think they flew very nicely.
No, absolutely. I feel like we've got 2 pretty good B-Wing pilots, and then you've got the efficiency of the generics. And you've got Hera in a B-Wing who has the same ability, but is more expensive and less maneuverable and can't generate evade tokens easily. And you've got an I3 with a worse ability than 10 and Braylon.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so we saw exchange of fire there. Sabine getting her range 1, both abilities triggering for the first time in the game. Did help her prevent some damage from Fifth Brother, but unable to do that final damage to take him off the table. And we come into the final turn of the game. Alex, before we play this game, you were, I think, a little bit worried about Vader. Having flown him, are you still worried? We've covered that he's going to be powerful, but is he going to be that mythical negative play experience?
Maybe. I can say. So I think partly what I'm worried about is that he's just going to be objectively very good. But the other thing is the amount of people that have been really excited about the prospect of Vader in a Defender ever since that Rebels episode he was in, like 7,000 years ago. I think he's going to see a lot of table time very early on. So I expect there's going to be, especially if it coincides with like the end of lockdown and in-person play happening again, I can anticipate a lot of local tournaments with like 3 or 4 Vader lists in them. So if you come up across 2 or 3 of them in a day, then you might have a miserable time. In terms of like breaking the game or sort of being like a really prominent force in the game, like the Nantex list or the Inquisitors that we're seeing now, like I'm not sure if he's going to be able to pair into something that can consistently beat the field enough to win event after event. But I think just because of the sort of fan appeal of him, coupled with the very strong pilot ability and the really good chassis, it is something that we're going to see a lot, and you're going to have a plan for.
Yeah, I think in this game, I think you've flown Vader very well. You've been conservative with him when you needed to be, and then you've turned in and gotten shots when he could do so safely. So I think I'm right in saying Vader's only fired 5 times this game. Now, those 5 shots have all been essentially incredible. But he shot 5 times and then given up almost 60 points. And that doesn't sound too bad when you say it that way.
Yeah, when you put it like that. But I think, I don't know, it's very difficult to get those points. Like there was a very unlikely string of events that led to him giving up those points. Firstly, me putting him in a position that allowed that to happen. And secondly, the sort of string of dice that followed. Like both of those are things that you couldn't really plan on. But yeah, when you put it like that, but 5 accurate shots is enough to win games in some situations. So as long as he gets more than 60 points when he's putting in those shots, then I'm more than happy to give it up.
So we see the final shots of the game here. Fifth brother rolling a crit, spending his force for hit crit. Disrespectful, I think. Sabine taking a crit, but fortunately not a direct hit, and gets to choose to shoot either 5th or 7th, both of whom I think have 1 force at this point. 7th actually target locked me to present a more attractive target, passing up the opportunity to evade. And honestly, I cannot remember who I go for. My way of scoring the most points as possible is to get a god shot into 7th sister. Strip the shields, get a direct hit, and kill her. But that seems unlikely, and I want to try and take something off the board. So after a lot of umming and ahhing, I believe I go for the shot into 5th brother here. But spoilers, it is not successful, and I leave the game having taken nothing off the board. Alex, I think your assessment was really good. I would be cautiously optimistic that Vader isn't going to break the game. It's not going to be a Nantex situation where there's nothing that can compete. But he certainly is going to be meta warping. And I think that if you want to go to those, hopefully in real life, store tournaments for the first month or so after he's released, that you probably want to be taking Vader or something that has game against Vader, because if you don't, you may well be in for that day-long kind of drudgery of hitting hard counters. It will be interesting to see whether after that initial period, it kind of evens out. Because as Lloyd said, it can go wrong. And I completely agree with you that the turn of events was unlikely and that there was an uncharacteristic mistake from you and only because of the game state. But it does show that a mistake can be problematic. And most players will make a mistake, per game, certainly a mistake per tournament. So there are going to be opportunities to take points off this Vader. And when you do, it's going to swing the game hugely. So I think both of your summing up was perfect. Is he good? Yes. Is he broken? Hopefully not. Do you need to have a plan for when you face him? Certainly. And I think, unless either of you have anything to add, that might be a nice succinct place to end the episode.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Join us again next week when we're going to go back-to-back weeks to bring you another game with new content as our very own Lloyd Bowman faced up against X-Wing infamous Dale Cromwell to see whether the new Interceptors can rival Vader as a valid choice for the Imperials going forward. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll join you next week. Bye bye.